And welcome back. Hello, everyone. This is Jim Grazanzio from Oracle, Oracle Code Dubai and Oracle Open World Middle East. Two conferences in one here. It gets confusing. Okay, I am here with Kristoff Copmans. Kristoff, how's my Dutch? Is it
Your Dutch is excellent. I have
excellent?
nothing to remark upon it.
Okay. You're being very kind. Kristoff,
I have
welcome.
to be because we're live streaming.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure
Glad
to be
you
here.
come by. Customer experience. You work in customer experience.
That's right.
What is customer experience?
I think I could give you 100 definitions, Jim. In reality, if
How about two?
Two definitions? How about an internal and an external one?
Okay.
So if we first reflect on internal definitions, it is very much the remit of trying to make sure that within every organization across the world, the operations that pertain to sales, to service, to marketing are as well aligned as possible to drive the end-to-end customer experience, the customer journey, the way that we ultimately approach a customer and that we drive them from value recognition to a product being sold or a service being delivered. The external definition, on the other hand, the customer going through that customer experience with you is how they feel about you as they engage with your brand, your company, your public sector organization, and so on. How do they feel as if they're being treated? Which touch points do they engage with as they feel that they're being communicated to? And ultimately, what is their end result as a result of that engagement?
Okay, great. So this is what you spoke about here, right? You had a couple of sessions?
Correct. I had one session this morning where I spoke specifically about public sector and the changing reality of how public sector is adopting new CX technologies to become more like the private sector, very much being seen as innovative, like the Dubai government, where they look to drive forward new value through, for example, improved customer experience in e-services, in the way they organize their marketing, and so on. And I've got another session later on today, Jim, about how customer journeys ultimately have to be built incrementally, how it cannot be an exercise in grand design.
Okay, let's just key off of that. Exercising grand design versus incrementally. Why the distinction?
Customer journeys used to be thought of as a single linear experience. People see an ad on an external website, they come to your website, they engage with the brand, they may fall out of the website, they abandon the basket, for example, if we consider the classical e-commerce environment. You retarget them, try and bring them back to the website to complete the journey, they buy the product, and there's after-sales service as a result. But that linearity, that way that we thought about customer processes, it has left this world, Jim. In reality, customer journeys are fragmented. They actually are frenetic, as if to use the term. And frenetic really means that the customer journey is now a plethora of different touch points. We have to try and reach the customer, even though the customer does not stick to the way that we design a customer journey. So rather than trying to solve for the complexity that we are faced with on a day-to-day basis, trying to think through all the potential scenarios of whether somebody will see your display ad first, then do a search on Google, for example, then come to the store, then, for example, speaks to a sales agent. It is about making sure that we incrementally start connecting some of the smaller dots. If somebody sees an ad on the website, if, for example, a newspaper, don't retarget them also via email because you've already got the engagement that you seek.
Okay, so that's your engagement with the customer.
Correct.
Okay. Now, what about the other side of this, where the customer is using Oracle technology?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what their experience is and how you engage with them.
So if you indulge, I'll use specifically the example of the Middle East to illustrate a story around ultimately the differentiation between the completeness of vision and the ability to execute. Those are the two key dimensions that we use to assess where people are in their ability to adopt a technology to drive the value for their end clients. When we work with customers here, they realize they have to change their business models. If we go back, for example, 10 years in time to Dubai, for example, marketing was not really seen as a necessary activity. People would buy cars. People would, for example, just show up in the showroom to talk about a car. They would get an additional apartment and so on. That reality has changed. The market has become more mature, and as a result, the need to adopt technologies to differentiate yourself from the competition has also become more pervasive and more acute. So that adoption need, that awareness of needing to move forward is definitely here. That vision as to where they want to drive their business is definitely something that we find is well established in the region. However, that is only one side of the aisle. That is only one part of the picture. you also need to make sure that you have people who will be able to adopt that technology into their day-to-day business, who are then able to use that in a revised process, in a new way of doing things, to speak to their customers, to deal with incoming inquiries. And that adoption problem, the chasm that may exist between the initial vision, the initial buy-in, and then ultimately driving on the road to value of being able to really embed this into the organization, that is something that we work with customers on a day-to-day basis so they can serve their customers better.
So are you talking about how they change their processes? In other words, this is not just, this requires a significant change on their part.
Absolutely.
So is this like a skills issue, or is it just a focus issue?
It is all of those things and more. Because in reality, if we make the differentiation between, for example, on-prem, where the IT department has, for example, been given the authorization to move forward with database migration, classical example, moving from one database to the other, in reality there's a fixed amount of work to be done, where you go through the configuration, where you go through the installation, the fine-tuning, and ultimately the handover to day-to-day business. But that's a one-off deployment. Cloud is more agile in its nature. You can't implement cloud, you can only embed cloud. You have to keep working at it on a day-to-day basis. So even if the analyst who's going to assess the reports may be available on day one, they will run out of steam at some point and need to upgrade their own skill sets to really take the evolving product set, the cloud that keeps evolving, to the next level. So whether you have alignment of skill sets on one day or the other is not enough. You need to make sure that you keep recalibrating process, keep understanding whether there's a gap between who sits in a process and who uses the technology, and ultimately what we would consider to be ideal state, and ultimately how you see your business moving forward.
Now, how do customers accept this? Change is always hard for everybody.
Absolutely.
Walk us through maybe a couple of generic experiences you've had with, once people realize that, oh, this is actually different. This is not just, say, more efficient of the same thing. This is a whole different experience here.
Mm-hmm. I've lived through this myself, Jim, so I'll give you an example. I can't name the company, but I will talk you through how this actually came about. So one of the key exercises in CX is the alignment between sales and marketing, the passing of customer leads, who marketing have sought on external websites, in the digital ecosystem offline, and moving them at the right time to the sales organization. So that sales receives those leads and is able to close, for example, on an outbound sales call, an actual conversion, an actual transaction. That alignment between sales and marketing, where the KPIs of sales and marketing are not necessarily aligned, is something that takes time. It takes time, and it takes bringing the right stakeholders to the table and having a difficult conversation around what actually a lead, for example, constitutes. And even if you have clarity of vision, for example, under these data points, under these conditions, we actually assess a lead to be good, and marketing should ship that lead from their ecosystem to sales. It may not necessarily be enough to translate knowledge buy-in into operational execution. And then you have to really start being creative. You have to start really driving forward POCs. For example, how do we show the difference between what they can do with the technology and how it changes in comparison to what they're doing at the moment? People are willing to learn. It is not reluctance to learn. It is not, let's say, the idleness of people to change out of a current state. It is because of fear of what the new state will mean for them on a day-to-day business. If they see that new state being exemplified and they see how they personally could benefit by running an experiment, for example, with a small section of the sales team who only adopted that new way of doing things, the new process, and they understand that if we roll this out across the entire organization, that all would benefit, we really have incremental buy-in translated into incremental value.
Right. I'm wondering what the reaction was from your talk yesterday, to some of these concepts. What did people say? What was the reaction? Any questions or any conversations you've had here?
So I always seek to be slightly controversial, and the opening line in my speech yesterday was very much public sector and private sector. What's really the difference? Because in reality, what's the difference?
What's the difference?
Because in reality, we see those two worlds not just merging, but also colliding, where private starts adopting public sector concepts and public sector starts adopting private sort of technologies or private ways of doing things. And in reality, that's an established viewpoint on my side, but it may be seen as controversial in an ecosystem where government and private enterprise is still considered to be very much a dichotomy between two worlds. And if you open up with that controversial point, but you're able to justify as to why you claim that statement to be true, then that leads to the expansion of certain conceptions. It leads to people questioning their own belief system and also the way that they held true to certain convictions. But also it opens up opportunities. And I think the best reaction I've had was that in reality they said, we always considered public sector to be constrained. We always considered to be bound to rules and bound to a certain way of doing things because that's the way that we should operate because we are public sector. However,
now is that a common thought around the world or maybe just here in Dubai, or is there like a local, is there, was that specific to here?
I think it happens here more than, for example, in the UK or the US, other sort of well-matured markets. Given that ultimately the history here is that you have to partner with the government for private enterprise in most occasions anyway. So in reality, the government here is a proactive partner in making enterprise do its day-to-day business, drive forward its operations. And due to that reality where the conception is already that enterprise and government can work together, we see a different approach. They say, actually, we recognize this. We didn't recognize it as much as you laid out in your speech, for example, but we already feel that that road that we're currently traveling on leads us to that same realization.
Okay. The reason I asked specifically about here is you mentioned a little bit earlier that you're going to be moving here soon.
Absolutely.
Right? Why? Where are you from now?
I'm originally from Belgium, but I've been living in London for about 4 years now.
Okay. So why the move out here?
It's not Brexit, I can just assure you that. It's not Brexit. In reality, I was already spending about 80% of my time in Dubai for the last 2 years anyway.
Oh, wow.
Working with customers here in the region.
So you have a lot of experience here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This region is on fire when it comes to CX and digital transformation, and ultimately is willing to invest in making those changes happen. We see very much that willingness to completely overhaul the way they do things today and drive forward to a new future state. And that is currently happening at an accelerated pace. Dubai is not, let's say, an established market such as the US and the UK where digital transformation waves may have come in incremental fashion. They like the idea that they can change from one day to the next and do so in a rapid fashion, but they need a lot of help. They need to understand how they can make that vision a reality, and that's why we're here on the ground.
Okay. Well, Kristoff, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
For coming here, and good luck with your...
Thank you very much.
Good luck with your migration, and if you're in Dubai or anywhere in the Middle East and you're interested in CX,
I'll be free. Thank you very much.
And we'll be back with more interviews very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.